Today is a great day to work on my startup. Let's do this. My architecture sucks. This is my startup, InsiderViz, and this is the architecture behind InsiderViz, and it sucks. So first and foremost, what is actually going on here? So I think you need to understand what it is before I can tell you why it's bad. First and foremost, we have the web app. This is the forward-facing public website that if you go to insiderviz.com, this is what you're going to see. This handles the front-end stuff, and this also handles the user management back-end stuff via the Next app. Next, we have the management app, which is the place where the admins can go in, see who's on the email list, see some basic analytics about the site, manage it from the back end, basically just a little admin portal for the founders and all that. Then we have the InsiderViz Forms monolith. This is where we actually handle all the crawling of the forms from the SEC. Then we have the Forms API, which is where we actually serve the forms from the SEC that we crawled from the SEC. So the Forms monolith will actually go through, crawl those from the SEC, load them into our database, and then from the API, that's where we actually go through and send those down to the front end and how we manage all of that, all of those aggregations and that kind of thing. Then we have the newsletter, and this is where we handle all of our newsletter stuff. So this is where we hold all of the custom written HTML and articles and all that stuff, and also where we send out to the people on our email list once every month or so for our newsletter. And then finally, we have the InsiderViz email sender, which is the thing that actually manages the email service that we provide for $4 a month. That is where the emails are actually sent from. They're not being sent from the Next app or from the management portal or for any of these. They're coming from there. And then finally, we have 15 more, which are archived repos that have done various different things in the past, or various different versions of the site, and are currently no longer in use. So with all of that explained and out of the way, why is this bad? Well, it's bad because it's miserable to work on, because we broke everything down into these tiny little pieces when we really didn't need to. Something you need to understand about me is that when I'm building software and when I'm doing things and when I'm learning things, whenever I learn something new, I usually get really excited about it and I take it to the extreme. And as you can clearly see here, the thing that I learned about around the time when I was architecting InsiderViz and building this out back in, I think it was August-ish of last year, was microservices and separation of concerns. The whole idea of taking your app and breaking it down into tiny little bite-sized manageable pieces that you can just work on individually and handle and do all this stuff. And on paper, that sounds like a dream come true, because imagine you want to add a new feature to their email service, so it's super easy to just go into the email sender and then handle it in there. We just update the email service and then tidy it up and bang, we're good. So that seems really nice on paper, but the problem is, the world isn't on paper. And when we actually go to try and manage all of this stuff, it starts to become a nightmare. So big teams will often have these giant distributed microservice-based apps where they have an email service, an auth service, a whatever service, and all that stuff. But you have to remember that each individual service you create is another service that you have to maintain. So these 6 different services that InsiderViz has, I and 3 other guys have to maintain them. 2 of them are front-end devs, and 1 of them handles like a lot of biz dev stuff. So there's not a whole amount of resources, and it really kind of just falls on me to manage all 6 of these, and that becomes a nightmare, because you have to understand that is 6 different CI/CD pipelines, that is 6 different sets of environment variables, that is 6 different sets of config. Multiple of these different apps are pointing to the same databases, so that means I need to make sure that the schemas are synced between the two, so that the Prisma file within the management, web app, and email sender, that needs to all be the same, or else it's going to break something. And same thing with the monolith and the Forms API. I need to make sure that I'm writing to the same database and I'm writing in the same way, so that I don't read the database entries in snake case out of the Forms API, but enter them in camel case within the monolith, and so on and so forth. This gets really hard to deal with, and the way you handle this is you need to have really strong contracts and boundaries between these different pieces. But when you're at the early stage that I am, I don't want to go through and maintain contracts for myself and document for myself and do all this stuff. It turns into a nightmare. So effectively what I've now created is anytime I want to spin up a dev instance of InsiderViz, it becomes a huge pain. Because if I want to test the email sender service, okay, now I need to boot up InsiderViz, then I need to boot up the Forms API, I might need to fetch some new forms with the monolith, and then I need to go through and boot up the email sender, then I need to trigger it, and then I need to test all of that stuff, make sure all of those environment variables are ready, and that's just a nightmare to maintain. Hey, real quick, if you guys are enjoying this video, make sure you like it, and if you're not already, make sure you hit subscribe. And before we get back to the video, I'd love to hear from you guys. Earlier today, I posted a question asking, would you like to see Insider Viz and Block, another startup I'm working on? I'll have more details on that pretty soon, but I'd love to hear, would you guys be interested in seeing these open source? It's not a commitment that I can actually do that. There's a lot of things we have to look into. I need to make sure the legality on that's good, the licensing makes sense, and then it actually makes sense from a business standpoint. But I think that could be a really cool idea, especially since I want to cover these very heavily, really give you guys a behind the scenes look at what these actually look like, what it's like to take an app from not just, doing to-dos and doing basic React stuff or being a weird Amazon clone that doesn't have any business logic to it, but really show you guys what production apps look like and what it looks like to actually run these, what it's like to build these, that kind of thing. So making that open source would help with that, and I'd love to hear if you guys would be interested in that. Again, it's not a commitment, but let me know. What is the solution? The solution is to collapse everything down into a couple different monoliths that handle everything and simplify how all of this works in two big repos. Now, the ideal would be one language, one giant repo, all handled in one place. That's great. But unfortunately, I do need to keep a Go repo and a TypeScript Next.js repo for reasons I'll get into later. But to start, let's talk about what I'm going to put into this Insider Viz next. So what do I need to solve on the web app side of things? So I need to handle the front end client side stuff. Check, that's already in here with the Insider Viz web app. So this gets put in here. Next, we need to handle the admin management portal. Instead of creating a whole new site and managing it there, we don't need to break that down like that. We can just add a protected admin route to the Insider Viz web app, and now suddenly that's all managed in one place, one project, one Prisma file. Check. One more. Great, one more is collapsed in. Next, let's talk about the email sender. Currently, this is a cron job running on just a random TypeScript app in that's just on a background worker somewhere. Vercel now offers cron jobs as part of Next.js, which is great. I can collapse that now into this one big Next app and just have this cron job, which will run every night to send out the emails, or maybe I could change this to do something slightly different, but with the power of serverless, it's really easy to just collapse this in, and we have another repo taken apart. Next, we need to actually handle the Forms API, which is currently written in Go, but what I can now do is I'm probably going to move this into the Insider Viz web app and just handle that through the Next.js API Lambda functions instead of through the standalone Go API. And I will get more into the architectural reasons for why these are currently separated. That's a whole different topic on why I have two different databases on Insider Viz. It's going to be a video in and of itself, which will come out later this week. But effectively, the reason is because we are a data platform and we have a database which has nothing to do with our users, and it's literally just a data set. So we don't want to contaminate that with user data, and we want to basically just have it be a giant data set that we can run over. So we have these two different data sources, but we're going to move all of that into the Next.js app to make it much easier to handle and manage, and we're going to leverage stuff like PlanetScale and the PlanetScale serverless driver to make this possible, run everything at the edge, get it super fast, super clean, super cheap. Next, we need to handle the Insider Viz Forms monolith, and this is where the Go app really comes in. Go has a very, very specific use case for us. We have a producer-consumer problem that we have to manage in crawling forms. The SEC enforces a 10 requests per second limit on us, so we are only allowed to make 10 requests to their servers within a second, or else they will rate limit us, boot us off for 5 minutes, and our app is screwed. So what we have to do is we have to be really careful that we only make 10 requests, but we need to crawl a lot more than 10 things a second. So what we want to do to make sure that we're operating at maximum speed is run a sort of producer-consumer type thing. We have a producer, which is going to be fetching 10 forms a second, and it will put those into a bucket that we can then consume and run through those. We can then run through those at will. We can spend as much time on those as we want. We can do as many of them as we want at a time, and we can leverage Go's concurrency model, specifically using channels, to accomplish this. And it makes a really clean and really good system for actually crawling these forms. And that's something that we can't accomplish in TypeScript, so we want to keep Go for that exact purpose. So that will now be handled in the Insider Viz crawler, and that's also where we're going to do more analytics and more different things on the forums to really add value to our users. So we need to keep that. And then finally, the newsletter itself can easily be folded into Insider Viz Next. That can just be part of the Next app. And then with all that said, we now have two projects that are much easier to manage. We have at most 2 sets of environment variables, at most 2 projects pointing to the environments. We have 2 different projects pointing to the same database. It's a lot easier to handle, a lot easier to maintain, and a lot easier to scale. You do not need microservices for your startup, most likely. It is something that will come later, and when you get to that point, you'll be able to hire people who can help you with it. But when you're in the early stages where I am and where a lot of you probably are, you don't need it. Use Next.js, use serverless, use all these amazing technologies at our disposal, and don't be scared of monoliths. This is something that I was terrified of. I was terrified of getting my project to be too big. I was scared of big files. I was scared of doing everything too big, and I think a lot of that comes from my education in school and the way they sort of taught us to do things. I had one class where it was like, we had a very strict 10 lines per file limit. Looking back, it makes me want to die, but I mean, that's just what we had to deal with. And, you know, it's stuff like that where I kind of didn't even realize that you could make these giant things, but these bigger projects and these bigger apps and these monoliths, they're a lot easier to maintain, they're a lot easier to work with, and they're a lot easier to scale, especially when you have stuff like technologies like serverless to make it possible. If you guys made it this far, I really appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, check out InsiderViz if you haven't, see what it looks like, and I'll have a new video coming later this week detailing why I have two different databases and what it means to be a data platform, and I hope to see you guys there.